Thank you for inviting me, Leeza. I'm going to walk around a bit because I really don't like being filmed very much. And I hate that everything ends up on the internet. And hopefully this will be able to at least not get me in it the whole time. So, Hope House. Let's begin. This is the Anne Frank house. I'm not going to talk about Anne Frank, and I'm not really going to talk about the Holocaust today, but I'm going to talk about the Anne Frank house because I made a visit there this year, and it changed the way I saw a lot of things. And it began with the queue, which is known to be one of the biggest queues, certainly in Amsterdam. It's around 3 hours long every day. It's incredible. 1 million people go to visit the Anne Frank house every year, and it's actually going up in numbers every year. 1.2 million was a record last year. And what's interesting about the queue is that, in speaking with one of the guides from the Anne Frank house, is that recently they tried to get rid of the queue because they thought, of course, people don't like queuing today, and everyone would much rather buy their tickets online. When this proposal was put forward, there was an uproar. Everybody wanted the queue. Nobody wanted to buy their tickets online. And I thought, why is this? And it immediately became quite interesting to think about the fact that the queue is the image we have of empathy. We see people in a public space, caring. We see them waiting. And these are things that are becoming obsolete in culture today. We don't see people waiting. We don't see how much people care about anything. Everyone is at their computers in their little rooms, ordering things on Amazon, loving them, watching porn afterwards, doing whatever they do, but we don't know what they are doing in public space until they come to the point of protest. And protest is when we see people gathering in the street, the queue is still going, is when we see people gathering in the street and showing how important it is to be together and how important something is. And people started to believe that we wouldn't know how important the Anne Frank house was if we didn't see that queue. And the interesting thing about the Anne Frank house is, of course, it's about a family, two families, hiding in a space, in fact. And the fact is that when you go into the house, you, of course, disappear. You go into these tiny sets of rooms. I was never interested in Anne Frank. I was never interested in the Anne Frank house, but I was teaching in Amsterdam, and I was teaching a course on materiality and ideology, and how current ideologies translate into materials that we drink from, design of drinking bottles, in architecture and space. And the students said, we don't want to go to the Anne Frank house because it's super mainstream, we're Dutch, we've been here before, we know the story, it's done. And I said, okay, well that's probably the reason why we should go to look at it, because anything that's right under our noses is the thing that we should be smelling first. And I said, let's think about it as sculpture, let's think about it as material, let's try to push aside for a second, sensitively, the grand narrative around the Anne Frank house and say, how does that translate into materials? And we say, okay, the house is about hope, it's about the future, it's about anti-fascism, but it's also about unity. So would it, for example, be ethical to have separate gendered toilets in a house that is about unifying people? What should the design of those toilets be, for example? Should they be wooden? Should they make you feel warm? Should they make you feel welcome? Should they be in steel? Should they make you think about the Holocaust, about mechanization? What font should they be in? What size should the font be in? And I started to think it was kind of interesting to think about the Anne Frank house as material. When we walked in, the first thing that our very generous guide, a man who works in a bookshop, has been there for 20 years, told us immediately was, the first thing you need to know about the Anne Frank house is that almost everything that you're going to see is a reconstruction. There's almost nothing of the original house left here. The house has been completely remodeled. The wallpaper has obviously been scraped off. The house was bought in the 60s and was in disrepair, and has essentially been restaged, rebuilt to look and feel like the original Anne Frank house, so that visitors in their millions can experience something of the experience of the family. We were walking up a staircase, we weren't in the secret annex yet, and I said to the guide, well, it's very strange because the wallpaper that we're looking at looks old, it looks original, it's got a patina, but it's fresh, there's no scratch marks. Where did this wallpaper come from? And he said, well, this wallpaper is actually from a factory from East Germany in the 1950s. It was the right match for the wallpaper that we saw in documentation, and so we bought all of the dead stock from this factory and wallpapered the house. And the first thing I thought was, there's German wallpaper in the Anne Frank house. The whole house is wrapped in German wallpaper. It's, if you think about how we experience architecture, one of the primary things is, of course, the surface. And the surface of everything has been produced in a country which ideologically is not the country that you're going to experience when you're going to look at the Anne Frank house. It's the enemy. But this excited me because I started to understand that actually what was essential for the people creating the Anne Frank house, the experience the visitors had, was in fact a sense, a feeling of authenticity, a feeling of being transported back into that time and place, and that needed to be done at any cost, because our primary experience in the present was prioritized over perhaps these technical, political, economical questions about where things came from. And this kind of pragmatism was something that I thought was very human, very beautiful, in a house that is so much about a specific ideology. We were taken into some special rooms. These are rooms that are not normally accessed by the public, and these rooms are kind of more restaged. Otto Frank, the father of Anne Frank, made a very canny decision, which I sort of believe in, which is to leave the Anne Frank house empty of furniture so that the house wouldn't become a fetishized site of people going and saying, oh look, this is the pen that Anne Frank wrote with, and this is this, and this is this, and make it completely about the family, but try to make the story communicate about what it's trying to mean about humanity. Except there are certain rooms which the visitors are not generally allowed to, but celebrities are, or politicians. And these are offices, and they've gone a little bit further. They've restaged them. They've, according to the guide who told me, also have created a scent of the jam factory that existed in the Anne Frank house at the time, and the office of the workers who supported the Frank family while they were in hiding. These are not spaces that most people can go to. So what does the public see? Before you get to the secret annex, you walk through the sort of front of a Dutch house. I'm sure some of you here have been to the Anne Frank house. And it's not a very titillating experience because you're walking through a series of empty rooms, and there's a lot of tourists in there with rucksacks and loud jackets, and everyone is jostling against each other, and everyone is wondering, what am I doing in this room? Because what happened here? This is a room where someone was working on a typewriter and they didn't even know there was someone writing a diary up there, hidden in the back. And so the Anne Frank house, at least when I went, put a series of videos in every single room, and those videos are on timers of between 40 seconds and 1.5 minutes. And they are testimonials from people who maybe knew the Frank family, or a story, a larger historical story. And they give the public a sense of timing, of how long they should spend in each room, so that after 50 seconds, 1 minute 20, you've consumed that experience in that room and you can go on. And it helps the public navigate how they should respond to each specific space. And of course, as you go through, your heart starts to beat because you're like, I'm coming to the secret annex, I'm coming to the point. This is the point where I'm coming through the threshold and the story comes to life. And of course, that is when you come through the bookcase. Incidentally, the last photo, which is shockingly bad, is one of the photos that I took while I was in a very undercover way trying to take photographs. You're not allowed to take photos in the Anne Frank house, and sort of trying to hide behind my students and get away with a few things, and I promised myself I'd never show them in public. And then I saw the guy watching me take photos, and I was like, okay, well, it looks like I'm allowed to take photos, so I started to be a bit braver and take them more publicly. And I asked him, I said, listen, you're not stopping me take photos, but we're apparently not allowed to take photos in here, and is it an issue with copyright? Can you copyright a house? What's going on? And he said, there's no issues with copyright. The issue we have is, that when somebody takes a photo, they stop moving. And we need to get 1 million people through this house every year. So we just cannot have people stop. And this was also very exciting to me because I thought, wow, this is a machine. We're all on a timer. This is incredibly contemporary. And yet we're talking about something that happened 70 years ago. We're talking about this moment where we're supposed to go and stop and be still and think and consider. And yet, what's going on is that we're on a ticket timer, like everything in life. And I like the democratization of that. I like that we're bringing this high ideal into a world of pragmatism. The secret bookshelf is one of the few things that is actually original. It's covered in plexiglass in the house. And another one of the original elements is the heights of the children and the family that lived in the house as they grew. It's a small piece of wallpaper. It's very moving. It's been cut out, replaced into the new wallpaper, and covered in glass. But the most moving part of the house, or one of the most moving parts of the house, is Anne Frank's bedroom. And this is where Anne Frank collected images of celebrities, of writers, of sculptures, and it really explores, in a way, the interests of a young teenage girl at that time, a girl who was obsessed with celebrity, of herself becoming famous, as she writes about in her diary. And there's this incredibly tactile, one-to-one relationship one has with these images, even though they're taken from magazines. They're very impersonal images. A number of celebrities visit the Anne Frank house every year, and it's interesting because in many ways the Anne Frank house is ready-made. The story is finished. We do not talk about the Holocaust. There was a good person, there's a lot of good people, there's one bad person who created a bad country, and everything went wrong after that. Hollywood has created numerous films about the Nazis, about the Holocaust, about this whole period in history, because in many ways it's a safe period to talk about now, because we are all so sure on which side we stand now. History is gone, 70 years has passed. And so in many ways it's a very safe place for celebrities to visit, because it's very clear what the product that they are presenting when they visit the Anne Frank house. They are saying, I care about history. There is something bigger than me. I am humble. And of course that is what they do when they go. They have their photographs taken. They have their Instagram photos. And it becomes part of a kind of larger experience on their visit to Amsterdam when they're doing a concert or a book tour or what have you. Of course, we know about the Justin Bieber controversy. He's a child, he's a monster, he's white and he's very rich, and he doesn't really know what he's doing. I think most of us know that. When Justin Bieber visited the Anne Frank house, he wrote in the guest book something along the lines of, she was a great girl. I hope she would have been a believer, a fan of Justin Bieber believer. The world went crazy, they demonized him, they said, this is not the way to visit the Anne Frank house, how can you make the Anne Frank house about you? Who is it about, I wonder? I don't know. But it's definitely not about you, it's definitely not about Justin Bieber. The most interesting thing about it, though, is not the fact that Justin Bieber said it, because personally, I don't have such high expectations of pop stars to be representing the voice of authority, the voice of sensitivity towards historical events. So it doesn't offend me personally. But what's interesting is that the original post that he made, the original guest book entry, was posted on the Anne Frank house's own Facebook page as a promotion. And I agree with their sentiment, because they need to stay current. This is something that happened in the past. 70 years have gone by, I keep saying. And how is the memory of something like this that is so important going to stay alive and stay relevant to young people today? It is by utilizing the methods that we have today to promote these causes. And Justin Bieber is someone that reaches to millions of young people. And so when they post that, they're saying, great, congratulations, Justin, you've got a concert tonight, everyone go. Also, you visited the Anne Frank house. And they're hoping that new generations of people will come that will see the museum and will spread the word. It's very complex. On the other end of the ideological scale, we have Beyonce, very successful black female singer. Some of you might have heard of her. She visited the Anne Frank house and she was largely praised. She's a Virgo, she does everything perfectly. She thinks everything through. And when Beyonce visited the Anne Frank house, she made the correct comments. She crouched humbly in areas of the museum where you're allowed to take photographs. She's seen in shadow. And for her visit, she chose a sky blue outfit from Topshop Unique. It's a British clothing brand which has a special section within it called Unique, which is slightly above the mainstream section. It's a little bit more expensive, but it is definitely not Givenchy, and it is not Dior, because you do not wear Dior to the Anne Frank house. The real-world effect of this, the calculable effect, is that within 45 minutes of her posting this on Instagram, the outfit was sold out internationally. This is the quote from the Anne Frank house. The devil here in black. The Anne Frank house had the Anne Frank story was turned into a film in the 60s, or in the 50s actually. And it was after Hollywood made the film that the Anne Frank house was actually purchased, because that was when the world woke up and said this is really important and maybe people should visit this house. And so it was from an outside source, in fact, another continent, another storyteller that made this local story so important. How much time do I have? I've got no idea how long I've been talking for. Anyone know?
It's 10:04.
I'm about halfway through.
You have about,
Really?
you have about 15 minutes actually.
Oh, cool. I'm a Virgo. We proceed towards the attic, and this is, of course, the kind of highlight of the tour. The attic was the place where Anne wrote some of her diary, spent a lot of time. This is kind of storeroom with potatoes. There was a cat living there, and she fell in love with the boy that was living in the house. And she stared out at this chestnut tree, the famous chestnut tree. And the chestnut tree is very important. It features in the book a lot as a symbol of nature, of renewal, of the way in which the family could see the passing of time. And unfortunately, the tree, I don't remember the dates, but let's just say 10, 15 years ago, for the sake of it, it got a disease. It's got a fungal infection, and it started to rot and it started to die. And this tree is, of course, so much part of the iconography of this house that it needed to be saved. And so there was a huge project of over €1 million to save this tree. You can see there's kind of large metal arms put in place to hold this tree together. But unfortunately, after all the work, in a storm, it fell down and was destroyed. They've since planted a new tree. But this was then developed into a project called the Sapling Project, in which saps were taken from the original tree and planted in greenhouses and cultivated, and were then distributed together with an American partnership to several states across the United States of America. Interestingly, some parallels with the legalization of marijuana. For me, the most potent place is the attic, because the attic is very, the attic is not strong enough to hold the public. So you can't go there, you can't fake it. It's just not strong enough. So you can only see the attic in a mirror, which I don't know if you can make out there on the top right. So you stand and you look up and you see a reflection of the attic and you see the light coming in. And it is truly, genuinely very moving, because you really then understand what has been lost with time, and how, in fact, you can never truly recover time. And that perhaps the best way to look at history is by acknowledging that the only way you'll see it is in a kind of distortion, and acknowledging that everything you see will also be reversed. Whilst that was kind of the most moving, it was also one of the most perverse moments to see this ladder next to it, the original ladder, covered in plexiglass, which was, for me, a kind of symbol of this existential crisis of democracy, where we are all offered this beautiful, warm wooden ladder upwards in society. We can all climb, we can all get there, and yet it's covered in this slippery piece of see-through plastic that we don't even know until we get on it, and we're constantly slipping down, trying to get to this place at the top. And for me, this kind of combination was extremely perverse and extremely sculpturally exciting. So there's more of the Anne Frank house. There's a museum, there's a section, of course, about the Holocaust, and there's a section that's much more technical about the diary and how it was edited and the genes. But the gift shop was kind of the final stop on the tour, and it's a very nice, minimal, sort of easily accessible space that sells a number of pieces of merchandise, all of which that I bought very excitedly by this point. And on the left side you can see is the diary, the English version. There are several language versions. This is a kind of replica based on the design of Anne Frank's original diary, sort of Helveticaed and seal-wrapped. That is a write-your-own diary. It contains 19 pages, 16 or 19 pages about the Anne Frank history and 192 blank pages. And it offers you the chance to maybe think about your own life, maybe think about the importance of writing in every period. And I think today, thinking politically, it's kind of important to document individual stories, etc. So I can see where they're coming from. But it's also a symbol, of course, of the importance of participation today, the ideology we have of participation, that we need to offer the public a way to interact with stories, to purchase, to own, to take home, to make your own. And that, of course, it's terrifying writing about your chia pudding and your yogurt session in the Anne Frank diary. But, but they very, very cleverly and very beautifully manage it, because they make it just abstract enough to make you sort of feel that you can write about your life in the diary. And on the right is perhaps the most beguiling thing of all, which is a historical cardboard model kit that you can build yourself. It's sort of about 100 pieces, and they pop out almost like a Meccano or a kind of miniature IKEA product that you can build your own Anne Frank house at 1:60. It's roughly the height of a wine bottle. And it's a very confusing object because it's not a toy, it's not abstract enough or childish enough to be something that you'd give to a 3-year-old and say, go and build the Anne Frank house. But it has kind of adult textures, it has real brick, and then when you get inside you start to see this sort of a real fur coat photoshopped and hanging inside, and it's very, very strange and very confusing. And I think it's a very, very beautiful object. I think they're both very beautiful objects because they're incredibly honest objects. And I think about these objects in the sense of thinking perhaps in a sort of optimistic way about the future, imagining how these objects in fact truly document the reality we live in today. That capitalism today is our dominant ideology. Nobody is safe from it, nobody can escape from it. We all need money, we all need credit, blah, 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 to participate. And nobody is safe, not even Anne Frank. Even Anne Frank has been consumed in the ideology that we've created for ourselves today. And in this sense, we start to get these very strange, uncomfortable materials. I think of them almost as anthropological documents of the time that we live in. And that honesty is something that is very beautiful and something that I cherish. And in this sense, I don't have a critique of what the Anne Frank House is doing, because I'm not the one sitting on the board with the numbers every year saying, how do we keep this memory alive? How do we keep people coming? Incidentally, all of the money goes to a charitable foundation which talks about not only Jewish history, not only the Holocaust history, not only trying to stop anti-Semitism in the world, but LGBT issues, racial issues, a whole range. So they're doing a lot of good work, educational work around the world. And yet, I'm not the one that has the responsibility of deciding where the future of the Anne Frank Foundation should go. And when I think about it, I wonder what are the other options for them today, because they simply have to participate like all of us. And I think about myself, and I think about how compromising it is to post a selfie on Instagram that hashtags something that I've done, a project that I've made. How we always, in some ways, are doing something a little bit dirty, but we're always pretending we're not because everyone else is doing it, and that's okay. And they're just doing the same. But we can judge them because it's about a poor little girl who died 70 years ago that not one of us in this room know and would ever have a clue what she would think about it. And it doesn't matter. Here's the house. I came away from the Anne Frank house and I was very, very excited. And I met with my galleries I work with in Tel Aviv in Israel. I just happened to meet them the week after, and I said, just been to the Anne Frank house for this idea, and I want to rebuild the whole Anne Frank house. And I want to take the model and I want to blow it up to full size, and I want to talk about all of this exciting stuff that I've been thinking about through this, that I think is somehow more truthful about the experience that one really is having when one is visiting the Anne Frank house. And you know, they're in Israel, and they said, oh, I think we should do it. I think we should build a house. And I said, okay, don't know. And then I went away for a few months, and obviously the magnitude of the questions that I was dealing with started to dawn on me, and I didn't know if I was really the right person to be doing this. I'm not Jewish. I don't know. I'm a man. I don't know. Am I ideologically placed today to speak about this? Will this create some kind of crazy Instagram post, Facebook hate barrage that will take it so simply that it will just be read as some kind of ridiculous joke? And first of all, the gallery said, you're doing this project. You have no choice, you're doing it. Secondly, I started to think, well, the reasons that I'm stopping myself doing it are the exact points that I want to make with the work, which are about speaking about the other, about something else that is outside of you, about working to try to engage and understand, but also being very honest with myself, which is that, no, I'm not going to talk about the Holocaust. I'm not going to talk about Anne Frank. But the thing that I can talk about is capitalism. And that is where I connect with her and with it and with everybody else. And that's something that matters. So, Hope House. Finally, we're in Israel. There it is. I was able to build about 40% of the house in the gallery in Tel Aviv. They still needed offices, so I couldn't put a floor in there. But I basically sliced the model into pieces and just sort of squished it into the building, and let the floors cut where they wanted. You can see the basement here, and kind of the way in which it kind of goes through the building. The gallery in Tel Aviv is very large. It's mostly underground, and it was an opportunity to build the whole house within a house. So it had this kind of safe environment to exist within. And then I started to think, well, Otto didn't want to put real things in the house, didn't want to speak about the way they lived, but I want to put things in the house that speak about the way we live, that are in fact somehow mirrors to the desires that we have, the hopes that we have, the dreams, the things that we think when we're doing something good, what are they actually in material terms? And so I started to put objects in the house, some of the things that I'd collected, that speak about different places in the world and somehow break the story apart. On the right are some museum tickets from the Apartheid Museum in South Africa, where you're randomly chosen, you get a random ticket to be white or non-white, and then you get a different museum experience depending on what kind of ticket you get. There's a door that was imported from Russia of a teenage girl's bedroom obsessed with Frozen. Frozen, this incredible Disney film, one of the first sort of feminist-leaning films made by a woman director, also one of the largest, in fact, the largest grossing female directed film in history, placed on the wall. As we snake through, we're not in the secret annex yet, I put political posters from the French election, one of the most recent elections in Europe, a symbol of hope for the liberals, because evil was triumphed over by a young, kind of cute business guy. The secret annex is entered through a library which contains 300 copies of 50 Shades of Grey. The book, you'll all know, is a famous kind of erotic-ish novel. Was very popular and sort of palatable to the British middle-class woman because all of the kinky stuff was actually done by a billionaire who was really hot and had a helicopter. And of course, money makes people, you're allowed to do stuff when you're really hot and you've got a lot of money. But nobody wanted to keep the book because it's embarrassing. You don't want to keep 50 Shades of Grey on your shelf. So they donated their copies to Oxfam, the British charity. And the British charity was so flooded with copies of 50 Shades of Grey that they had to put a huge kind of very English-style press bulletin out where they made a barrage of copies blocking a shop in Swansea in Wales just to say, please stop sending us copies of 50 Shades of Grey. So I bought them, and they are here creating the sort of annex. So I like to think about what, like I said earlier, what are we doing when we think we're doing something good? Why do we want to be good people? And what happens when we start thinking of ourselves as good people? Because that becomes a kind of ideology, does it? And when you have to be good today, or when you want to affect a lot of people today, you need to start using these mega streams of capitalism. You need to start selling things. You're starting to play this game with, something that is a little bit icky, but is for the greater good. And so, of course, 50 Shades of Grey is one example of that. We've got Olafur Eliasson's little son. And as we go through, I started to create kind of domestic settings that people could go into, feel comfortable, and recognize things from their daily life. This was the parents' room of Anna Frank. It's a kind of very IKEA-ized setting. All the doors and windows are fake. Everything is wallpapered. It's completely constructed like a giant toy. And in the living room was maybe one of the only personal elements. It said music. Can we get sound on this?
I'll not be singing for quite some time. I'd like to sing a love song. I know you share this love. I pray that you'll never let it die. Every morning you
That was me when I was 10 in a school performance of The Sound of Music. I don't have time to go over what it's about, but it's really about... It's a very, very weird story where the people who are supposed to be anti-Nazis are actually just really Nazi, and the Nazis are actually really sophisticated and well-dressed and look great, and it's just total American fantasy of what happened in Austria about the invasion of the Nazis. And I am a Japanese kid in a very, very white English school, singing about how great it is to be clean and white. And we've all just spent 3 weeks making Nazi flags out of felt, because we won the war, so we can do that. You know, that's Britain. It's celebration. Everything is great, and we can wipe it on the carpet. And that was included in the salon of the parents' room of Anne Frank. Of course, it's a play within a play. It's, in a way, it's for me about the kind of indoctrination that I think I probably had, which is about this uniform positivity about having been so fucking right for having lived in this little white village and for us having won the war. And of course things got a bit more complicated as I grew up. This is a bathroom. It doesn't look like this in the Anne Frank house, but it here contains some things that maybe talk about how we live or what we want or the way we narrate things to ourselves. And I think we've been talking a lot about research today, and there's been a lot of childhood stories and narratives, etc. People often confuse my work to be about narrativization. And I've basically been spending my entire life, my practice, trying to destroy narrative, trying to erase the importance of it and ridicule it and turn it upside down on its head, whilst knowing, of course, that we can never escape it because life is narrative, because we're born and we die, the sun comes up every day, blah, blah, blah. In the bathroom, we have some more narratives. We have narratives of winners and we have narratives of victims. On the left, we have the toilet, which is a product designed by Philip Stark in combination with Duravit, which is a mass brand. And it's interesting today because these superstars who sell toilets for 800 euros know that it's not cool to be above everyone anymore. We have to come down to the masses. We have to sell to everyone. And not only does that make you more money, but that also makes you a nicer person. So we have a toilet here that's 80 euros by Philip Stark. And I love this object because, you know, the box comes with his face on it, and he looks so serious. And you think, I'm going to take a shit on something Philip Stark designed. It's going to be better than my last shit. It's going to be, what is it going to be? I don't know. You can think about what it is, but things are going to get better. There's an optimism, because someone is involved. Are you stopping me? No, you're not stopping me. Creme de la mer. No, we're going to, well, I'll rake through. Here's Anne Frank's bedroom. This is the wall that has been restored, and on top are the images of visitors that have come to the Anne Frank house. Last but not least is, of course, the outfit that Beyonce wore, which you can't have everything today. People say that, don't know why. They don't sell this outfit anymore, it's sold out entirely. So the only way for me to show this work, which was actually the seed of the kind of object that I wanted to show in the house, was to have it handmade, to contact the factory, go to Italy, source the fabric, and have it literally hand-frayed by a very expensive German tailor, to make something that is essentially an off-the-peg outfit. Basement, I'm running through now, I'm going to finish. Running through the basement, here we have the model pieces laid out, the diary kind of infinitely displayed. We have a kind of work that I call extension. And then finally you come to the attic, and you're laughing, but none of this is a joke. And the attic was kind of, you know, you see through everything, you kind of see that this is a cold world, it's clinical, it's not the warmth of the secret annex, it doesn't give you the human inviting, touchy-feely thing. You come down and it's kind of like a sort of very methodical, psychotic place. And I wanted to play with different modes of museography, and time is one of the important elements of that, because if I'm presenting Hope House, it needs to be democratic, in some ways. And what is more democratic than not having an ideology of design, of time, of period, and presenting all times, all periods? There's a heater from the 20s, there's something from the Middle Ages, before the house was even built. And I wanted to use every single mode of representation that I could today to present the interiors. And so, of course, when we come to the attic, there's nothing there. There's just a series of objects that are from the exact period that Anne Frank would have been around. And this is the most emotional space, but also in some ways the most emotionally stunting, because you go there, you see it, it's dirty, it's old, and everything has been touched by humans. But you realise that this is the biggest fiction of all. The house is travelling. It's not the Anne Frank house you go to, it's the Anne Frank house that comes to you. It will be shown next at the Kunsthaus Bregenz in Austria, after that in Berlin, and then potentially in Cleveland next year. Oh, that's it, I'm done. Thank you.